You ever have one of those moments where you wish you never said yes to something? Yeah, that was me last winter. I agreed to spend a few days at my buddy Chris's family cabin up in the mountains. Thought it'd be a good time. Snow, beer, maybe a little ice fishing. Just a guy's trip, you know? Turns out I should have stayed home. It started before we even got there. About an hour from the cabin, we saw something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a deer, but as we passed, I caught a glimpse of its face. It wasn't an animal. It was wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its eyes reflecting the headlights like a predator's. Chris sped up, shaking his head. "Just a trick of the light," he muttered. But I could tell he saw it too. We got there late in the afternoon, just before a snowstorm hit. The place was isolated, deep in the woods, with no neighbors for miles. Chris's family had owned the cabin for years, but he hadn't been up there since he was a kid. It was rustic. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, just an old radio and a landline that may or may not work. Cozy, but a little eerie in the way old places tend to be. First night was fine. We drank, played cards, and laughed about how soft we'd gotten living in the city. Snow piled up outside, and by morning, we were completely snowed in. Not a big deal, until weird things started happening. It started small. Footsteps in the snow that weren't ours. We figured maybe an animal wandered by, but the prints were too big, too human. Then, the knocking started. 3 short raps on the front door around midnight. We thought maybe the wind had knocked something loose. But when we opened the door, there was nothing but fresh snow, and those damn footprints leading away into the trees. That night, I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something outside, branches snapping, soft crunching in the snow, like someone pacing around the cabin. Chris heard it too, but we tried to brush it off. Just our minds playing tricks on us, right? Next day, we decided to check out the area, see if maybe someone else was around. We hiked a bit through the trees, following the footprints from the night before. But here's the thing. They didn't lead to another cabin or a road. They just stopped. Like whoever made them had just vanished into thin air. That night, things got worse. The knocking came again, but this time it was louder, more insistent. I looked out the window and saw something, or someone, standing at the edge of the woods. It was tall, too tall, and its body was all wrong, like it was stretched out. I told Chris, but by the time he looked, it was gone. We locked the doors, stoked the fire, and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping in. But then the whispering started. I don't know how else to describe it. Low voices, just outside the cabin, murmuring things we couldn't understand. At one point, I swear I heard my own name. Chris freaked out and grabbed his dad's old shotgun from the closet. "If this is some psycho messing with us, I'm not playing," he muttered. We sat in the living room, backs against the wall, watching the windows. The fire flickered, casting weird shadows, making everything feel more distorted. Then the door handle started rattling. Chris aimed the shotgun, but before he could do anything, the door creaked open just an inch. The firelight barely reached that far, but I swear to God, I saw a hand. Not human though. The fingers were too long, the skin pale and stretched too tight. We slammed the door shut, bolted it, and sat in silence, waiting for morning. But the whispers kept going, circling the cabin, fading in and out. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have passed out. When we woke up, everything was silent. No footprints. No signs that anything had even happened. We packed up and left as soon as we could dig the truck out. Never looked back. A few weeks later, Chris called me. He'd told his dad about what happened, expecting him to laugh it off. But instead, his dad got real quiet and just said, "That's why we stopped going up there." But here's the part that really messed me up. When I got home, I found something in my bag. A single, blackened, frostbitten finger, wrapped in cloth. And the worst part? I swear to God it wasn't there when I packed. And then, 2 nights later, I heard 3 knocks on my apartment door. When I opened it, there was nothing there, but fresh footprints in the snow, leading away. You ever feel like you walked into a place that didn't want you there? like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for you to leave. That's what it felt like the second we stepped into the lodge. And that should have been our first warning. It was supposed to be a relaxing winter getaway. Me, my girlfriend Sam, and two other couples, Jamie and Mark, and Lisa and Ben. We booked this remote lodge up in the mountains, miles away from anyone. No neighbors, no distractions, just snow, a fireplace, and enough booze to keep us warm. The place was massive, bigger than we expected. 4 floors, ancient wooden beams, and a grand staircase that led up to a series of locked rooms the owner said were under renovation. That was warning number 2. The first night started off normal enough. Drinks, a stupid card game, and a fire crackling in the huge stone hearth. But sometime around 2 a.m., Lisa woke us all up screaming. We found her standing in the hallway, shaking, her wide eyes locked on the ceiling above us. "There was something in our room," she stammered. "I felt it breathing on me." Mark, trying to be the tough guy, shrugged it off. "Just a bad dream." But then we heard it too, a scraping sound from above. Slow, deliberate. Like something heavy was dragging itself across the floor. Only problem? The room directly above us was one of the locked ones. None of us slept after that. The next day, the storm hit. Winds howled, snow piled up against the windows, and the roads became completely impassable. We were stuck. But it wasn't until that evening that we realized we weren't alone. Sam was in the kitchen when she saw it, just for a second. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing at the edge of the woods, staring up at the house. She swore its eyes were black, hollow. By the time she got us, it was gone. Mark, still clinging to denial, laughed it off. Just shadows. But then the whispering started. Low, indecipherable murmurs crawling through the walls, seeping through the vents. By midnight, we were all in the living room, too scared to be alone. Every so often we'd hear footsteps upstairs, slow, deliberate, pacing just above us. And then, at 3 a.m., the doorknob of the locked room rattled. Ben, fueled by a mix of fear and stupidity, grabbed the fireplace poker and stomped up the stairs. "Screw this," he muttered. We followed, half of us too scared to stay behind, the other half too scared to go forward. He kicked at the door, and to our surprise, it swung open. The room was pitch black. The air inside was heavy, damp, rotten. And in the center of the room stood a single chair. And in that chair sat a woman. Her skin was gray, sagging like she'd been sitting there for years. Her lips were pulled back into an awful grin, eyes sunken deep into her skull. And the moment the door opened, she turned her head toward us. No, not turned. Twisted. Too far. Too fast. Lisa screamed. Ben dropped the poker. The woman's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just a black mist, spilling from her lips like smoke. The lights flickered, the room shook, and we ran. We didn't stop. Not until we were outside, standing in knee-deep snow, staring up at that cursed house. The windows on the top floor were dark, except for one. She was still there, standing now, watching us, grinning. Then the front door slammed shut on its own. A deep, guttural laugh echoed from inside, rattling the very ground we stood on. The house wanted us back. We didn't go back for our things. We walked through the blizzard until we reached a ranger station at dawn. When we tried to report what happened, they just shook their heads. "That lodge?" one of them muttered. "Yeah. You're not the first. That was 3 years ago. I don't go anywhere near the mountains in the winter anymore. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the cracks in my apartment, I swear I hear the sound of a chair creaking just behind me. And last night, when I looked in the mirror, just for a split second, I swear, she was standing right behind me, her mouth open, black mist curling toward my face. I should have never gone back to that town. But when my sister vanished without a trace, I didn't have a choice. Winter Hollow wasn't much of a place, a forgotten town buried in snow and surrounded by endless forest. My sister Julia moved there last year for work. She sent me postcards at first, talked about how quiet it was, how the people were strange. Then, 2 months ago, the letters stopped. Calls went unanswered. And then came the final voicemail, static, whispers, and Julia's voice, distant and shaking. "It knows you. Don't come here. Please." Then silence. I drove through a blizzard to get there. The town was wrong. Every house dark, curtains drawn. People peeked through windows, but never answered their doors. The only building with lights on was the church, looming in the center of town, its steeple cracked and rotting. The sheriff found me first. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his face gaunt, eyes darting toward the trees. "Leave before dark." I showed him a picture of Julia. "Where is she?" His face twisted. "Gone. Like the others." That night I checked into the only motel. The clerk, an old man with yellowed teeth, never blinked. Just slid me a key and muttered, "Stay inside after midnight." I didn't listen. At 12:04 a.m. I heard it. Footsteps in the hall, slow and dragging. When I looked through the peephole, I saw nothing, just darkness. The hallway lights flickered and then I heard breathing. Right outside my door. I locked it, backed away, and then knocking. 3 slow, heavy knocks. I held my breath. The knocking came again, louder. The door handle twisted. The whisper came next, Julia's voice, but wrong. Too deep, too hollow. "Let me in." I didn't. By sunrise I was packed and out the door, but the town was worse in daylight. The people stood in the streets, all facing me, their lips moving in silent prayer. Their eyes followed me as I drove to the church, the only place I hadn't checked. Inside, the air was thick, stale. Candles burned, but the altar was covered in rotting meat, bones arranged in spirals. And in the pews sat figures, motionless, draped in white sheets, their faces hidden. And then, they turned. Under the sheets, their faces weren't human. Just smooth, featureless skin. No eyes, no mouths. Just blank, pale ovals. They stood up, moving as one, whispering in that same warped voice, "It knows you." The door slammed shut. The last thing I remember was their hands reaching for me, stretching too far, too thin. And then, I woke up in my car, miles away, engine running. My phone buzzed. A voicemail, Julia's voice. "It followed you." I slammed the brakes, breathing hard. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone, replaying the voicemail over and over. The voice was unmistakable, but there was something else underneath it. A second voice, layered, guttural, almost like a growl. I looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but my breath fogged up the glass in front of me, and in that thin layer of mist, a single word appeared: "Run." My pulse pounded. I hit the gas and didn't stop. I don't remember how long I drove, only that my vision blurred from exhaustion, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they ached. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my porch light flickering weakly in the storm, I felt safe for the first time in days, until I saw my front door was open. Inside, the air was freezing. My breath curled in the dim light as I stepped inside, my ears straining for any sound. My apartment looked untouched, nothing out of place, nothing missing. But when I turned toward my bedroom, I saw it. A single, wet footprint on the floor. Not mine. A shadow moved in the hallway. My breath hitched, my heart slamming against my ribs. The whisper came again, this time inches from my ear. "You shouldn't have come back." The lights went out, and I wasn't alone.